edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, your correspondent, Webster Tarpley, reporting from Washington, D.C., and it is now the late afternoon of Friday, the 28th of September, and we are completing one of the most hectic and surprising days in recent U.S. political history, culminating a very hectic and event-filled week in particular that we've had, with special emphasis on action in the Congress, right? The monomaniacal focus on the Trump White House has had to shift substantially to action in the legislative branch. I'm sure Don is not happy about that. But here is now the situation, again, moving very fast and showing little sign of letting up as we get into the usually vacant hours of late Friday afternoon. Right? When you get past 3 o'clock on Friday, a lot of these characters have gone home. Right now, that's not the case as far as we can tell. If you want to know if they're there, go look up the Senate Democratic or Republican cloakrooms, and you can find out where they are, more or less, if they're in session and when the next one is. But here's the bottom line right now. Trump has lost his governing majority. It's amazing. It is a harbinger of what's going to happen in the November election. Trump's majority in the Senate is kaput. He has no majority in the Senate. He cannot ram through what he wants. And this, of course, you might say, well, that's not news. There was that going on in the summer of last year with the McCain thumbs down. But this is now a specific measure that the Republicans are supposed to agree on. It's supposed to be the raison d'etre of this regime, which is to pack the Supreme Court with fascist judges so that you'll have a pre-constituted fascist majority on the Supreme Court to ram through union busting, voter suppression, union busting, destroying the social safety net, fascist austerity, genocide against the American people. According to the wishes of the billionaire class who think that they're going to compete in the world on that basis. They are crazy. They are the ancien régime, and they have that fey quality, the fey, meaning not likely to survive too long as a regime. So Trump has no more majority. Here's what we had. When we started today, the arithmetic on Kavanaugh was 49 yes, all Republicans, and the two who were missing, in theory they have 51. Right now it was 49 yes this morning, and now it's down to 48. That is to say, as we started the day, it looked like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were not committed to voting for Kavanaugh. They had not announced pro-Kavanaugh votes. And in the course of today, Kavanaugh got up to 49. Sorry, got up to he got as far as he was going to get. In the course of the day, Flake was counted a pro-Kavanaugh vote. So there it was, 49 in favor of 49 in favor of Kavanaugh, and the Democrats assumed to be negative, but also questions about Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Manchin. Haunted Mansion of West Virginia. He really should be beyond the point of having to flirt with Kavanaugh, but he feels he has to because of the volatility of that electorate. We won't judge him now. We'll get him later, believe me. But Heitkamp also maybe the most threatened. Her I can understand. She needs to keep a low profile. But what has now happened in the afternoon is a meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There have been a number. What am I saying? They met in the morning to make speeches. We'll tell you something about the speeches, pre-vote speeches from just about all of them. Some of them walked out. Booker and the senator from California, Harris, walked out. They were so incensed because it looked like an attempt to successfully railroad the Kavanaugh nomination out of the committee and onto the floor. But reality, once again, turned out to be richer than anybody's plan that we know of. And what emerged then was they were supposed to vote at 1:30 Eastern Time this afternoon. They adjourned at about 1 o'clock. 1:30 came, 1:30 went, and it then turned out that in the caucus room or in the antechamber behind the dais where the senators sit, there were negotiations going on involving a bunch of Democrats on the one side and Congressman Jeff Flake of Arizona on the other. And it was clear that there was some difficulty. There was something he didn't want to do. And since the Republicans need every single vote with their paper-thin, wretched majority, that they nevertheless want to make the basis of a dictatorship, the Republicans had to wait. In other words, Flake can say, hey, Grassley, I don't care, you're the committee chairman, but you're going to wait for me because I have the vote that you need, and without me, you go down to humiliating defeat. And Trump and Mitch will say your name is mud forevermore. So then what came out of this was Flake made a proposal saying, I'm willing to vote in favor of Kavanaugh in terms of voting the nomination out of committee. But there's a catch. I demand that there be a 1 week or up to 1 week FBI investigation of Kavanaugh. He didn't go through the details, but we know what it is. Of Kavanaugh, of this character judge. According to other remarks that we've heard, it looks like this includes that the investigation is open to Deborah Ramirez. It's open in addition to somebody like Julie Swetnick. It might be open to others, maybe the woman from Colorado. We'll talk about this because this now gets into our demands. But that Flake's little speech was that the country is being torn apart by partisanship and that the process objections of the Democrats, that there's no questioning of the one eyewitness to the alleged rape attempt, that would be Mark Judge. There's no questioning of him. He gets to just send a little letter from his lawyer saying, I don't know nothing, and that's supposed to be enough for him. So there's Judge to be grilled, and then there's the whole question of a thorough, capillary FBI investigation. Now, we have provisos on this, too. But for the moment, this is a step forward. It is a step forward. So Flake is obviously concerned that the Supreme Court is losing the confidence of the public. One of the main tasks of government, maintain public confidence, avoid the appearance of corruption as well as the reality of corruption. That was not happening, so Flake got very upset and had to do something. So this is what he ended up doing. And for the moment, this gives us what we need, a delay. That's what we want, a delay. That's us, not the Democrats. Washington, D.C. And once again, it's the afternoon of Friday, September 28th. Lots of things happening. The fight against the fascist yoke and in favor of Americanism goes on. And right now, the Central Front is in the halls of the Senate, but it's also in the streets, and don't forget it. It's in the social media. There's room for everybody to get involved, and then those results will be reflected at the moment in the legislative process. Our goal, of course, is to stop Kavanaugh. We'll give you a summary of Kavanaugh's fascist credentials here in just a minute. In that committee hearing, Kavanaugh came on essentially saying yesterday afternoon, in part two, he presented himself as a fanatical Trumpian fascist. That's what he wants to be, a Trumpian fascist warrior. And that is intolerable. So you could hear the rivets popping overnight and the rivets popping this morning. In other words, this regime, the power system between Trump and Mitch and Ryan and the rest of these people, it was creaking. You could feel it. It was under tremendous stress. And, of course, the view of Trump and Mitch and Ryan is push forward with the worst possible stuff and devil take the hindmost and just push forward and try to plow through. Plow through means to steamroller the opposition. That was Mitch, the spokesman for the billionaire class, right? The guy who thinks that money is speech. So, we were reaching a breaking point today. Were the Republicans really going to railroad this nomination through with nothing more? That you're not going to question the one eyewitness to the thing you've been talking about all day yesterday and for days before that? You're not going to talk to Mark Judge? You're not even going to try to? You're going to let him get away with I don't know nothing sent in by the lawyer? And then, of course, the tradition of the FBI background check is everywhere in the federal government. You're going to not have that? It's a little bit strange, isn't it? And then, of course, things like the polygraph. The Defense Department, the FBI, the CIA, they live with polygraphs. They have them once a month, at least once a year. They're all over the place. And you're going to say, no, Kavanaugh gets a lifetime seat with no polygraph. These are all things now to wedge in to try to drive into the opening that we've got going now. So right now we have a week. If we take this literally, big if, but let's just sketch it. What they seem to be saying is that the vote on Kavanaugh on the floor of the Senate would take place now next Friday, right, in a week. So that would give us already, that would give us the 7th of October, am I right? It looks like it might, but you get the idea. It's in a week. It's next Friday. It's not the 7th of October. That's the wrong date. See, we're just improvising everything because this has all been going on until essentially a few seconds ago. So, in the meantime, there might be an apparent progress of the Kavanaugh nomination through the bowels of the Senate, but also maybe not. The original schedule from Mitch McConnell had been today an attempt to vote Kavanaugh out of the Judiciary Committee. That has happened, but there's a proviso. Now the question is, Saturday, tomorrow morning, the day you hear this, a vote on the motion to proceed. In other words, we're going to have a vote soon. We're opening debate. We're going to have floor debate on Kavanaugh. This is usually the 60 hours. Now, what is possible, if this understanding is actually serious, they could very well say, motion to proceed, start floor debate, so every one of them gets a chance to go to the floor and make a speech. Then originally, now this is where it gets critical, Mitch McConnell's original plan was on Monday to have a vote to cut off debate. This, in other words, a cloture vote. A cloture vote on Monday, and that would be with 50 votes, and then on Tuesday, originally, they were going to have a confirmation vote in the full Senate on the Senate floor. That would be the last word to send Kavanaugh on his way across the street to the Supreme Court. Now, as far as we can see, today's vote has happened. Tomorrow's vote may happen, but then the moment of truth will come next Monday and anytime next week after that, where there would be the theoretical possibility of cutting off debate after the 60 hours, and then, of course, an attempt to ram through the final vote next Tuesday would have to be delayed. Now, there are no guarantees, needless to say, and you're dealing with duplicitous people. You're dealing with a bunch of snakes. So the reality, though, is that right now, Mitch McConnell does not have the votes to ram through Kavanaugh. He might have them, but he doesn't know that he has them. And I think they're very much afraid of a repeat of the healthcare debacle of last year. This impacts their fortunes at the polls. So again, right now, we have Flake, who says, I want the FBI investigation. We have Murkowski. She had said this a couple of days ago. She wants the FBI investigation. And we even have Senator Joe Manchin, Haunted Manchin of West Virginia, who says he wants the FBI investigation. Now, Manchin is somebody who had been listed as undecided, as we said, were Murkowski, Collins, Heitkamp, and Manchin. Flake is not really undecided, but he's giving support to Kavanaugh with a catch-22. So again, right now there's this group of, what can we call them, centrists? I don't know. Well, again, Flake, Murkowski, and Manchin. We assume that Collins is probably also going to be in this group. They are needed. Mitch McConnell needs them to ram through the nomination of Kavanaugh. We don't know how far their opposition will go. Let's talk about that in a minute. We don't know what they're prepared to do if Mitch McConnell tries to stab them in the back, betray them, throw them under the bus, and so forth. Back in Washington, D.C. Now, please remember, this stuff is moving so fast. You got to be with me every night of the week at 9 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. For that, AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Go to AmericanSystem.tv and join us every evening at 9 p.m. and follow this stuff. Now, let's just see where we are. The votes are not there. What are they prepared to do? There is no explicit threat where these people like Flake, Murkowski, Manchin, Collins, they don't say, if you try to have a vote without a sufficient FBI investigation, then we will vote against Kavanaugh and sink him, because that would be the end of him, unless something else is going on that we don't know. Either way. So what we would like is for these people, right, who are now posturing, right, these are now the guardians, the conscience of the nation and all this, essentially the liberal Republicans, Flake, Murkowski, Collins, right, the liberal Republicans play a big role, and they want to posture. Okay, you want to posture, we're happy to pay attention. We will applaud you, but we want to have an explicit statement that if Mitch tries one of his old tricks, right, like didn't he lie to Collins once before? He promised that something would be brought up for a floor vote. Never happened. So we've been burned by Mitch. The only thing that's going to keep Mitch honest is a threat to vote down his boy Kavanaugh. Of course, that's not really his boy. He's the boy he didn't want. He's Trump's boy. Now, therefore, the only way this understanding can be enforced is if you can keep Mitch honest. Now, the couple of other questions, right? Mitch controls the Senate floor. You can't make deals in the committee. Even Grassley, right, a powerful committee chairman, powerful. Grassley says he will make a good faith effort to enforce this because the way it worked was in the committee vote, Flake said, I'm willing to vote this guy out of committee, but I want that FBI investigation for up to a week. And Grassley said, okay, I will do whatever I can to make that happen. Now, of course, that puts the ball in Don's court. Down at the White House, we had Trump pontificating, talking to the president of Chile, primarily about the situation in Venezuela. That is not a good combination, right? We know that Trump is by nature an aggressor, which a lot of dupes could not recognize in this past election. So Trump is essentially in a kind of evasion mode, right? Soft line. He says, Trump says, oh, Kavanaugh's incredible. I thought his testimony yesterday was incredible. I guess that's what he's going to say no matter what. Trump is on the soft line. He says, I'll do whatever the Senate wants. Whatever the Senate wants to do, I'll do. And that means I'll put it in the hands of Grassley. Now, this, of course, this sounds like Kavanaugh saying, I'll do whatever the committee wants, right? So who's wanting here? Grassley is the one that Trump mentioned. So Grassley, that's our old friend Senator Grassley of Iowa, he's got to make a public statement saying, I am formally asking Trump and Wray, W-R-A-Y, the head of the FBI, to conduct a quick, expeditious investigation, but of Blasey Ford, of Mark Judge, of the other people in that meeting, that party where the rape attempt took place, and in addition, Swetnick and Ramirez and anybody else. The Colorado woman, if she wants to prefer charges. In other words, there ought to be an open door. The ideal thing would be to say, if you have charges against Kavanaugh, the door is open. Come to the FBI and they will investigate your charges. So in other words, you will have remedied this terrible situation where the women are intimidated and then targeted themselves if they make accusations against powerful people. And of course, this is a system not likely to be abused because if you lie about it, then you're in line for the 5 years in jail under the lying to the FBI statute. So I don't think that's a simple open door to chaos. No. So we started the day, my plan to start, or even by noon or so, I wanted to stress two things. The first is we are now under the shadow of fascism. We here in the United States are under the shadow of a fascist coup d'etat. I have been talking about this for several days. It is a form of fascism known as the permanent austerity dictatorship. It is articulated by one-party rule, presidency, House, Senate, and above all, a pre-constituted fascist or at least extreme reactionary majority in the Supreme Court. And the points are that we've always gone through. The suppression of voting rights, the attempt to bust unions and other mass labor organizations, or really any mass organizations at all, an attempt to destroy the social safety net, an attempt to destroy labor legislation, social legislation, and so forth, and impose killer pollution. And finally, the most important, killer austerity. Killer austerity for the American people. A series of austerity measures that add up to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of needless deaths every year as part of a cost-cutting program, right, in the land of the Republican tax scam. So that's one side. We are in the shadow of fascism. We are in the shadow of something like Vichy France. And there are other things that go with it, right? The loss of civil liberties and so forth. However, at the same time, what we're seeing once again, we have still the strongest civil society in the world. Civil society is essentially everything between the individual and the family, but everything from there on up to government and the presidency, the federal government, state governments, and so forth. So we have a strong civil society, presumably the strongest in the world. And today, we had what amounts to a coup de théâtre, a surprise event, right? A shocker. And it was most welcome because, of course, by about 1:20 in the afternoon, it looked like this was all going to resolve itself into a stand-up party line vote by these Republican hand-raising thugs, right, the Cruzes and Crappos of that committee, that they were simply going to vote Kavanaugh to go to the floor of the Senate after 60 hours of debate, and there would be no FBI investigation. So now something has happened. Civil society is rising up. It is, in many ways, a revolt against fascism. It's a rebellion against fascism by civil society in the United States. Dr. Ford, who testified yesterday, is an exponent of this. This is every woman speaking. Obviously not quite every, but as far as white, suburban, educated, married, and cultured, she said, this is my civic responsibility. I have to do a public service. Now, that kind of mentality is what goes into making the strongest civil society in the world. And she turned out to be part of the conscience of America. And id, we'll get to the id, that would be Kavanaugh in a minute. Christ Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So what we're seeing is a rebellion by the strongest civil society in the world against attempts to consolidate a fascist regime. We talked about this several times in the last week. Remember, in Germany, it was the vote of March 1933, the so-called enabling law, enabling legislation, enabling Hitler to seize power. He was already in power as a chancellor, but to transfer all power, budget, armed forces, police, civil liberties, everything into the hands of Hitler. And that was voted on. And you can see the vote totals if you scroll down on my list there, the headlines, as you can see them at tarpley.net. So that was March 1933. Then we should also remember July 1940, July 10th, 1940, just a little bit after the catastrophic military defeat by France in 6 weeks. So this is about 2 weeks after that. And under the orchestration of Pierre Laval, who was later shot as a traitor, he was able to get the French National Assembly, a combination of the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies, to vote up the end of the French Republic, the Third Republic as it's called, and the dictatorship of Marshal Pétain. The other one that we should always bear in mind is Mussolini. So Mussolini comes into power in Rome, Italy, in October 1922. He is invited by the King of Italy to form a government, which is voted up by the Parliament, Chamber of Deputies, and the Senate there too. And this remains, in theory, a sort of semi-democratic government, or it's an increasingly authoritarian government, but where the at least some formal features, some of the window dressing of democracy is maintained, and that lasts through 1923 and 1924. Does any of this sound familiar? So he gets into power in October 22, could be November, And then for 2 years, he rules within the democratic forms, but then towards the end of 1924, he arranges the assassination of his main antagonist, the socialist leader Matteotti, who was killed. And then, in a series of actions in the wake of the death of Matteotti, Mussolini then comes out as a full-fledged dictator. Now, that is maybe the one that is closest to us, but there is a kind of a mixture. Let's do a mixture between Vichy and Mussolini. The Vichy part is you have a national disaster, and an unpopular minority tries to seize permanent power in dictatorial forms, ending the republic, right? That's what we have today. Today, they're unlikely to say, we're ending the American Republic. We're going to abolish the Constitution and change the name of the country even. No, they won't do that. They'll just do that in practice. That would be a pre-constituted fascist majority in the Supreme Court. The Mussolini one shows that it can take a while, and the Vichy one shows how some of these other features. So some combination of those two, I think, are very, very close to where we are. So the point is, though, civil society is fighting back, and fortunately for us, there's an election here in 6 weeks. So a couple of other notes. It would have been better for Flake to put his understanding into an amendment. In other words, what this committee votes on is a nomination. It's a bill. And that could say, and the proviso of this is that the floor vote, the final floor vote on Kavanaugh cannot occur unless and until the director of the FBI, Wray, has certified that he has explored everything and that he pledges, takes responsibility, puts his own neck at stake that they found everything there is to find about Kavanaugh. Because, as we'll hopefully get to, you got to watch out for what you wish for, right? If this FBI investigation is put into the hands of the FBI field office in New York City, a nest of pro-Trumpian reactionaries and worse, well then, they'll probably come back saying, we found out that Kavanaugh is a saint, but we found out that Hillary is actually guilty and needs to be indicted, right? They're capable of that. That's what we had in 2016. So the FBI is a profoundly compromised institution. We understand the cable TV people night after night have got to make the FBI look good because Trump is attacking the FBI and you want to have some powerful institution that can do something. Yeah, we get all that, but it's better not to build your political rhetorical house on the FBI because this is a slender reed. So what's going on right now? The word was that Lindsey Graham, who is attempting to make himself the fixer between Capitol Hill and the White House, Lindsey said that he was going to go to a meeting with Flake and Mitch McConnell, find out what they wanted, and then Lindsey said it would fall to him to try to set things up with Trump. Lindsey says he's nothing if not practical, and if you don't have 50 votes plus Pence, you need 50 senators plus Pence, you can't get Kavanaugh through. Now, one of the things that Manchin is undoubtedly doing is that Trump is going to West Virginia tomorrow to pontificate in favor of Manchin's opponent. Manchin has got about a 9-point lead. On the other hand, once again, volatility, we don't know. I think what Manchin wanted to do was to join this compromise so that he's not against Kavanaugh. He's kind of suggesting that he might even be for him. I'm sure if it looks like that Kavanaugh is going to win, Manchin will vote for him, but at the point where it won't make any difference. If he's the critical vote, it might be different. This we don't know. And the question of Trump, right? Trump, of course, between now and Saturday morning, it's anybody's guess. So none of this works. If Mitch says, no, I'm not doing this, we'll have a vote on Tuesday, final vote, then these people will have to say, do you believe in anything? Are you the nihilists and cynics that you seem to be? You liberal Republicans and you right-wing Democrats? And if Trump says no, same question. Do you believe in anything? Or are you just a puppet? Right? Are you just there as a time server? Now, part of this came out of conversations between Coons of Delaware and Flake. They're ideologically not the same. We've always looked at Coons as being an addict of this bipartisanship, very weak, very unreliable. We don't know, though. And their discussion was about really public confidence, right? That there's got to be public confidence in these institutions. And that performance by Kavanaugh yesterday is that the Supreme Court is a partisan snake pit with somebody like Kavanaugh. There's also the question of deliberation, the greatest deliberative body, or whether they railroad people. So at the moment, Kavanaugh is hysterical. He wants no delay. He wants to be immediately put on the court. So in that sense, he's high and dry. May not last forever. Concerning this compromise, is it open to Avenatti? Are you willing to have Avenatti bring in his client and the witnesses that are there to corroborate the reports of the client? We got to get Avenatti brought in and let him ride herd, right? Let him be a public warning bell, alarm bell, if they try to do something crazy. Now, it's a society under the shadow of fascism. On the other hand, the strongest civil society in the world is fighting back. There was even this question of, was Flake influenced by two women who accosted him in a Senate elevator and said, we're both rape victims, and you're essentially saying that our experience means absolutely nothing, and you're going to put a rapist on the Supreme Court. What kind of a court has rapists? It really is too much. So this you can say, since Mitch doesn't have the vote, they're trying to paper that over. Get back to you in just a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley broadcasting once again from our nation's capital, where the sun is once again peeking through the overcast. It was pretty dismal today, but the possibility of defeating Kavanaugh has reopened, and the sun is now shining rather warmly. It's early autumn. So here's the point. We now have 1 week. Appeal to people and make sure they understand it. In theory, any victim of Kavanaugh's could now come forward and have a colorable case to have the FBI investigate her story. All those people who are cowering because they're intimidated by the Republican attack, slander, and calumny machine, they can now come forward. They can say, here, investigate me. Here's what he did to me. Obviously, the FBI could say no, but then you take it to the Democrats on the committee, the Democrats in general, and you might have a pretty good chance of getting some traction. You can stir the pot. The point right now is there are no guarantees. The one guarantee is if you don't do anything, fascism is coming down. And this is not hyperbole. I'm not some mindless radical who sees fascism around every corner. No, it's very specific. But this is now what's coming. As we talk about that in just a minute. But the possibility now is that other people will come forward. Avenatti, Avenatti's client, Miss Swetnick, I think, has done a short interview with one of the lesser websites. That's going to be worth looking at. Avenatti, however, promises that during the course of this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, he and his client and perhaps others that are in that entourage will be able to come forward. So support that in every way. If you have a Twitter with a retweet button, use it. Write your own. If you don't want to write your own, for whatever reason, then come to mine, Webster G. Tarpley at Twitter, retweet them. And you'll be doing something to throw some weight into the scales against fascism in your country. Now, Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh, once again, a Trumpian hooligan, an exponent of Trumpian fascism, neo-fascism, what can we call it? He sees himself, as he put forward in this screed, his philippic, his diatribe, his ranting and raving speech, all about himself, all an exercise in self-pity. You saw those tears? Those were tears of self-pity. He's sorry for himself. He hasn't been given everything he wants. It's been unjust. Does this mentality sound familiar? This is Trump. You can be president, you can be king of the world, and you'd still be a victim because you're treated unfairly. In other words, unless you could control the will of every human being on earth, you're always going to be crying and whining that you've been treated unfairly. So, there's what he is. Right? He says, I'm a victim of a democratic conspiracy. He plays right into the paranoia of the extreme right, the lunatic fringe. They bring in this poor woman, this unfortunate case, Rachel Mitchell. She tries to weave a paranoid conspiracy theory about how some central authority, somebody, no doubt Soros or somebody like this, is providing the money for her travel, for Ford's travel, for her lawyers. The lawyers say it's all pro bono. They're not getting anything. For the lie detector test. Who paid for the lie detector test? Eventually the lawyer had to say, we did, the ones who are not even getting paid. Paranoia. This is crazy. You could say, you remember the famous lock her up chant of the Republican convention. This is the lock her up judge for the Supreme Court. Right? He's going to embody this. The other thing, of course, is the id militant. Right? Normally in civilization, the higher faculties of the human mind, hopefully reason, the highest faculty, but also understanding, the sense of duty, custom, routine can be a civilizing force. And then we come to the lowest department of the human psyche, the id, the force of opinion, and all the urges that go with it. Well, what we saw there, raving and raging, and then weeping in self-pity, that was the id militant. So the idea is, watch out, you're going to have one id militant in the White House, and then you're going to have another id militant up on Capitol Hill, right, across on the far side of the Congress from the White House, but he'll be up there. How could such a person ever mete out impartial justice? How could anybody in his right mind take a case to the Supreme Court and say, we're going to get a fair deal? Here, go to the Supreme Court. I walk by there a lot. What does it say on the front? Equal justice under law. With this guy, with Kavanaugh, it's going to be make checks payable to Judicial Crisis Network and Federalist Society, and, of course, get it all cleared with Don and get it cleared with Mitch and Ryan. Equal justice under law means that you've got to be impartial. There is something called judicial temperament. In other words, it's a kind of a calm. It's a kind of a neutrality on these issues, right? We don't recommend moral agnosticism. No. We recommend natural law, but the application of that to individuals has to be done in a calm, sober, and systematic way. Right now we've got judicial positivism, right? We know it. It's this crazy originalism, and even worse, textualism. We reject those. Those are legal positivism. What we want is the role of natural law, but not anybody's natural law. It's got to be the natural law that is implied by the preamble to the Constitution, starting with the general welfare, the common defense, the more perfect union, the blessings of liberty, that there's got to be a posterity, and so on down the line. That is how you read it. That adumbrates an entire theory. I hope one day to spell that out. It's going to take a bit of work. But this would then be the Supreme Court as a kind of second Congress, with the Congress paralyzed by partisanship, right? By Republican sabotage, really. Republican sabotage, not so much partisanship. And by the Weimar dynamic that we're getting, that would be the Kavanaugh court, the Roberts court. Senator Whitehouse is always very good at pointing out the big issues. So he says, look, this is judicial capture. We've all heard of regulatory capture, right, where the corporation that say the Federal Communications Commission or the Federal Trade Commission or the Food and Drug Administration, huge monopolies that are supposed to be regulated, turn around and capture and corrupt the agencies that are supposed to be regulating them, right? Going back to Theodore Roosevelt and the progressives. So that's regulatory capture. What we're getting now is judicial capture. And Whitehouse pointed to 70 decisions over recent years, all 5-4, all favoring corporations, the rich, the powerful, trampling on workers' rights, consumer rights, right to be free from pollution and related stuff. And this, of course, this is with Kennedy on the bench. This is the rats cabal, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, Scalia, and Kennedy. And they gave you this. And with Kavanaugh, it gets worse. Back in a minute. This is Radio Webster Tarpley here in Washington. So they started today at 9:30 a.m., more or less. There was an attempt by Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut to say this committee should subpoena Mark Judge. That would have gone far. It was voted down by a straight Republican thug 11-10 vote. Grassley started raving that the burden of proof is on the accuser. Grassley, the Fifth Amendment says you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It does not say that you have the right to have the benefit of the doubt and the presumption of purity and innocence when you want to get on the Supreme Court. There is no right to get on the Supreme Court. It's not like you're being punished. This committee does not have the immediate power to punish Kavanaugh, but simply saying, no, Kavanaugh, you're not getting the cushiest, most desirable, most powerful plum job, patronage post in the federal government. Lifetime, fixed for life. With lots of prestige, you can pontificate. You'll be invited to give lectures, and on and on. So the burden of proof is on Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh is saying, senators, please vote for me. Please support me. Please help me get through. Burden of proof is on him. And all this other stuff is absolute redneck, stupid, backward garbage. Leahy pointed out that the atmosphere is surreal. Alice in Wonderland, I guess the Alice is Kavanaugh, sometimes known as Saint Brett the Virgin, sometimes known as Saint Brett the Martyr when he starts crying. Kavanaugh has, of course, mocked the committee, insulted Feinstein, insulted Klobuchar. He seems to pick on women. That seems to be a feature of this faction. Things are in some ways worse than Anita Hill. Leahy points out, since he goes back, right, 44 years, I think 8 or 9 judge hearings like this, every time Kavanaugh has testified in front of the Senate, there have been accusations of perjury. What did you know about Bush? What did you know about surveillance, electronic wiretapping? What did you know about torture, Abu Ghraib? What did you know about renditions and black sites? Then there's the question of Manny, right? Manny being this guy who worked for the Republicans, and he was stealing memos from the database and then funneling those to Kavanaugh. And this is now proven by documents, but it's just well, he denies everything. And then now, right, he denies things that are proven by the documents. And people saw yesterday in the late afternoon, he was lying about all sorts of things. There's a whole bunch of dirty stuff from his yearbook that White House asked about, right? What is Ralph? What is Boof? What is Renata Alumnius? And so forth, right? And this is all dirty stuff. And he basically lied. He said, no, that's not what you think it means. So the other thing, of course, the conspiracy, that you're playing into this conspiracy madman stuff. He's a partisan figure. Oh, here we go. Another one for the legal eagles out there. There is a compendium, a legal textbook called Wigmore, the author, the editor. And Wigmore says, the greatest legal engine for the discovery of truth is cross-examination. And this comes up now in the case of Mark Judge. Mark Judge says, I don't want to talk to you. Well, it's not enough to send in that letter saying, I don't know nothing. You've got to be cross-examined, right? They did this yesterday. They brought in this unfortunate Rachel Mitchell, but you'd have to do that now. So there's got to be subpoenas. There's got to be cross-examination. This brings us back to the current FBI probe. We want Wray of the FBI to announce the beginning of this investigation today, before the end of the business day. Right? There's still about an hour. And we want the FBI to have subpoena power if they need it. Normally the FBI does not have subpoena power. You can't talk to the FBI, at least on a background check. You can't talk to the FBI can't force you to testify if it's just a background check, right? If it's nor can they, frankly, in a criminal investigation. They can arrest you, but you can't be forced to talk, because that's the Fifth Amendment. But there should be subpoena power to say, here, listen, Judge, that is Mark Judge, you can't just blow us off. You're going to have to come in and testify because you have to. And then come in, and if you want to plead the Fifth Amendment, that's up to you. But if you don't come, contempt, and then you go to jail right away until you're willing to talk. So all of this happened today. Klobuchar pointed out that all the checks and balances have now failed. Only the people are left. Now, in an immediate sense, it obviously means people like Ford and Swetnick and Ramirez and others, Colorado. There's even one about a Rhode Island yacht. And this has got to roll on, because otherwise you're going to have a lock her up. They're going to take down equal justice under law above the Supreme Court, and they're going to put the new inscription, lock her up or him up. They probably have an electronic sign so they can change that. The famous three-party goers, right? There are three-party goers, and the Republicans claim they all say, and this is a lie from perjury here from Kavanaugh, that they've all denied it, that they don't know anything. No, they don't say it never happened or Kavanaugh is innocent. They say we don't recall. And as Ford pointed out, right, if you were not traumatized, there might be little reason for you to remember such a nondescript event. This woman, Leland Kaiser, has said she believes Ford, so that may change the content of this. Finally, I would say there's an unfortunate tendency by senators like Hirono and Gillibrand to paint this as men versus women. No. This is not men versus women. This is fascists against Americans. That's the division we want. Stop with this men against women. This is real political stupidity. That may get you short-term gate receipts and some short-term traction, but that's bad for the country. Fascism or being an American? Remember, the most anti-fascist country. Never had a fascist regime up to now. Don't spoil it now. Never allied with fascism. Never appeased fascism. That's America. So that's worth fighting to maintain. And we'll be back in just this radio. Now, work on this, right? Those are the practical activism pointers. Now, this is the Munich weekend, and we were trying to dedicate more of the show to the Munich weekend. We're going to do Munich from here on in. It's obviously the question of Munich is the question of appeasement. We're talking about the Munich Conference of September 29th to 30th, 1938. 80 years ago. There are a couple of articles. We found an article in an Irish newspaper talking about appeasement, that the West is bad. It's written by the Russian ambassador. Well, I'm hoping for that Russian ambassador to write another article about a year from now or less, in late August of next year, when we get to the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Tell us about that one. But right now, let's talk about Munich, right? So this is a conference. We'll get to it in a minute. What you have to know in the background is the top appeaser is Sir Neville Chamberlain, the guy with the umbrella. He is a puppet of something called the Cliveden set. The British wants you to say Clifton. You will hear Clifton, like Clifton, New Jersey. The Cliveden set, who are they? It is a bunch of super rich aristocrats, although they have bought their titles in a couple of cases. It's Lord Astor, Lady Astor, too. Actually, there are two Lord Astors. There's Lord Astor, Lord Lothian, Lord Halifax, who became the British foreign minister, Lord Brand, the head of one of the investment banks, Lazard Brothers, and their entourage. They controlled the London Times. They control the London Observer. They control a lot of the members of Parliament. And their game is appeasement. They believe that if you encourage Hitler, build him up, make him strong, you can send him east, and he'll destroy Stalin, and Stalin will destroy him, and the British Empire can last for another 100 years. That's it in a nutshell. And this depends on everything going exactly the way they want it. And, of course, that is not going to happen. So in 1935, they encouraged Hitler right away by letting the Nazis market their bonds on the London market. That was Lord Montague Norman of the Bank of England. Very early on, helped the Hitler people stabilize the German economy. Then in 1935, I think we have the Anglo-German naval agreement that sort of allowed Germany to break out of the disarmament clauses of the Versailles Treaty that had ended World War I. In the spring of 1936, Hitler says the demilitarized Rhineland, the strip of German territory on the west bank of the Rhine, on the side towards France, we're going to put our troops back in there. Under Versailles, that was supposed to be maintained as demilitarized, no troops, no fortifications, above all, no Siegfried Line. Well, in go the Germans, and nobody does anything, and that's already a very serious blow to the French, because they now have no strategic cushion, which has tremendous implications for Eastern Europe. In 1937, Hitler continues his rearmament. In the spring of 1938, it is the Anschluss. It is Hitler absorbing Austria, another big violation of the Versailles Treaty. And then, in the summer of 1938, Hitler starts his agitation that there is a part of Czechoslovakia along the German border generally inhabited by numerous ethnic Germans, and this is true. Hitler starts saying this should now be called the Sudetenland. It's a kind of a new name for them. The Sudeten Germans have to be brought back into the Reich, says Hitler, and if he doesn't get what he wants, it's going to be a general European war, because France has a treaty to support Czechoslovakia. We told you, I think, before about the Little Entente, Romania, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia, a kind of anti-German and anti-Hungarian treaty system. So by the beginning of September, what's it going to be? Well, the Cliveden set, I'm going to have to call them the Cliveden set because otherwise it's too confusing. The Cliveden set dictated an editorial in the London Times, September 6th, 1938. Editorial. The Times says it might be worthwhile for the Czechoslovakian government to consider making Czechoslovakia a more homogeneous state by allowing the secession, the detachment of that fringe of alien populations who are contiguous to the nation with which they are united by race. In other words, we want to sell a key part of Czechoslovakia to Germany, right? All those circumlocutions. This is critical because this is the industrial area, right? Skoda factories are more or less in this area, but most of all, the French have their own version of the Maginot Line against Germany that they built in the 1920s. These are effective fortifications, and the Czechs have a army of about 30 or 35 divisions. They are well trained, they are experienced, they have these fortifications. It's not clear whether Germany would be able to punch through and take this over. So the London Times editorial of early September is a shocker for the world. The French say these are the Germanophiles, the Cliveden Club, well, everybody thought this was official British policy, and it was. So, now here's the thing. There are 3 meetings that we have to talk about 80 years ago. On September 15th, Sir Neville Chamberlain, with his umbrella, went to Berchtesgaden, and that's Hitler's alpine retreat, the Berghof, his mountainous castle, I guess. And you've seen where Chamberlain has to walk up these stairs to meet Hitler, who's at the top of the stairs. It's typical Charlie Chaplin. That's September 15th. And what comes out of that is a deal that Czechoslovakia is going to be dismembered in principle, but the details are still not possible because Chamberlain's got to take this back to the cabinet and convince some people that this is what has to happen. On the 18th of September, there's a speech by Mussolini in Trieste, where Mussolini says Italy will be on the side of Germany in this one. It's important because when Hitler had wanted to seize Austria some years before, Mussolini had said, let's go slow with that. Let's not do that now. On September 22nd, Chamberlain goes back to Germany and meets with Hitler in Bad Godesberg on the Rhine near Bonn, much closer. And in this one, this is the interesting one where Chamberlain comes in and says, okay, I have secured the support of the British cabinet for breaking up Czechoslovakia. And Hitler says, no, that's not enough anymore. That's totally inadequate right now because the Czechs have been killing Germans. They've been provoking. They're running wild. This is not enough. I can't accept that. Chamberlain is shocked. Of course, he realizes he's dealing with a fascist dictator. That's the whole idea. And he goes back and says, okay, let me see what I can do. Now, this is beginning the critical part. On the 23rd of September, 80 years ago, the Czechs mobilize. They bring in 1 million troops, and with all kinds of people are called from their normal civilian occupations, put on the uniforms, pick up the gun, go into the fortifications, and await developments. This scares the hell out of the German generals. They're not sure they can conquer those fortifications. And then, on the 29th, the meeting in Munich with the communique on the following day, the 30th. Back in a minute. Back to World Crisis Radio. So we're just reviewing the 80th anniversary of the Munich Sellout Conference of Appeasement. The actual conference is 80 years ago, Saturday, the 29th, today, in terms of when most of you begin to hear this. And the communique and other stuff, the wrap-up was in the early morning hours of the 30th of September 1938. And the reason we're talking about this is because with Trump and Pompeo and Bolton. We're back to appeasement. Trump wants to appease Russia. Trump wants to appease China, or in substance has been appeasing China, right? Why didn't he destroy the ZTE telephone company? He backed off and appeased China. Same thing with Rusal of Deripaska fame, and that's appeasement. Trump and Pompeo are also they're appeasing Madman Kim, Little Kim of Pyongyang, North Korea. He's getting appeased. So you got to see why appeasement is bad. Doesn't avoid war. It guarantees war later on, and you'll be in a weakened condition. That's what Machiavelli says about appeasement. Now, here's the thing. We got these good historians, very interesting people. We have Carroll Quigley of Georgetown. We have Frederick Schumann of Williams College, and we have Gaetano Salvemini of Harvard. These are people who taught in the 40s, 50s, maybe into the 60s. So, of these, Quigley, this is Clinton's professor at Georgetown, and Schumann argue that in order to convince the British public to accept the betrayal of Czechoslovakia to Hitler and the simultaneous wrecking of the French alliance system in Eastern Europe, the Sir Neville Chamberlain government, the Cliveden-Sett government, deliberately induced a war hysteria in London. According to Quigley, the war scare in Great Britain was the most intense between September 15th and September 28th, 1938. That September 28th is 80 years ago today, as I record this on Friday. It was fraudulent. So here's what Quigley writes. This war scare was fraudulent. Lord Halifax, pro-Nazi member of the Cliveden-Sett, was deeply involved in its creation. This operation was carried out by steadily exaggerating Germany's armed might and belittling that of the British and the French by calculated indiscretions, such as a statement that came out from the British government in September 1938 that there were no real anti-aircraft defenses for London, constantly hammering the danger of an overwhelming air attack without warning by building ostentatious but useless air raid trenches in the streets and parks of London, and daily warnings that everybody has to get a gas mask, even though real experts were of the opinion that this was not a likely way of attacking. So that was Quigley. Now, Schumann, the partition of Czechoslovakia decided at Munich, right, the centerpiece of the whole thing, the big sellout, a modern, practically Western country, a democracy, the only one left. The partition of Czechoslovakia had been approved in the diplomatic sphere at Munich, or was going to be, was in the process. You couldn't do that successfully without parliamentary and public support in Britain and France, democratic states. This support was crumbling because people were protesting the betrayal, the sellout, right? What we've seen after the meeting with Putin, after Helsinki, after the same thing going on in Singapore. The solution to this double dilemma was a work of evil genius. First of all, manufacture a new hysterical threat of war so that the indignation about the surrender of all the Western values would become public panic because of the fear of Armageddon. The terms of the original surrender had to be made appear just and honorable by comparison with the new terms which Hitler was demanding after Bad Godesberg, right, when he said this, what you gave me before was everything, but it's not enough. The new demands would be briefly resisted even by the Quai d'Orsay, French Foreign Ministry, and Downing Street and the Foreign Office. The parliaments of Britain and France would be brought to the very brink of war and then snatched back through concessions to Hitler making possible a settlement on the basis of the original demands, which would now appear eminently moderate, desirable, and even welcome, as a way to escape from the appalling prospect of universal slaughter, destruction, and indeed annihilation. So Schuman tells you what did they do. In England, you had to inculcate terror into the population. When you listen to these Trump administration people, they say, well, Russia is the second biggest nuclear power in the world. That's part of the mantra. So what are we doing here? We're so afraid of Russia, and we're so afraid that little Kim with 1 or 2 ICBMs is going to be able to attack the United States? Isn't that a little bit exaggerated? And by the way, based on the Bob Woodward book, don't we have some THAAD ability to shoot down a limited ICBM strike or IRBM strike like that? So here we go. On Thursday, and I'm not sure what Thursday they mean, but it sounds like this is in that period from the 15th to the 28th. On Thursday, 14 gas mask distribution stations were opened in London. All citizens were ordered to report for a fitting of gas masks except children under 5. Radio announcers gave awe-inspiring instructions to bewildered citizens as to how they might escape sudden death in case of a gas attack. All over England, thousands of men were piling sandbags around public buildings and, scariest of all for many, digging huge holes in the public parks. These yawning graves, it was said, would be covered with corrugated iron and earth and would constitute civilian shelters during air raids. Now, the individuals who did this probably thought this was serious, but the cabinet members who planned the terror campaign were not serious. These measures, for the most part, had no relevance to actual defense against air raids. So the British school, this guy Wheeler Bennett is vaguely part of this British apparatus behind Kissinger, right? Yandell Elliott, Wheeler Bennett, Yandell Elliott, Kissinger, sort of like that. So they say, oh, this is a fantastic theory. This is the pre-Munich plot, a secret agreement between Chamberlain and Hitler that was set up in advance and then carried out, essentially, right? So Chamberlain, is he really capable of plotting like this? Well, I see no reason why. He represents Perfide Albion, and he's got these lords behind him, right? The lords we went through. Astor, Lothian, Halifax, Brand, on and on and on. Lord after lord. This character, the radical communist journalist Claude Cockburn or Coburn, and his son's wife is running for Congress in Charlottesville, Virginia, I think, unless my genealogy is faulty. This guy writes that there were Cagoule lords. Now, the Cagoule was a French fascist organization, and these were the Cagoule lords. So this is the pre-Munich plot, and there you have it. So we'll talk more about this, but that's the Monument of Appeasement. 8 years ago this weekend, this Saturday, this Sunday, the Munich sellout of 1938, and Trump is now attempting to bring back the Munich sellout. We'll see. On Monday on American System, 9 o'clock, and next